Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we are going to do the Sabaton history for Rorke's Drift. We did the Sabaton song Rorke's Drift a couple of days ago. If you haven't seen it yet, I'll put the link to it somewhere up at the top up there. Also, I'm hoping that I can get started on the first part of the Battle of Midway tomorrow. So that's what I'm hoping for. If everything goes as planned, that first part will come out then. Um, Also, I'm looking at a couple of different ancient history videos to get into. One in particular, I haven't done the channel yet, so I'm not sure how good it is. I'm going to go look at a different video from that channel, see how it is, and if it's a decent enough video, then I'm going to do it. So, got some ancient history stuff I'm working on. Battle of Midway, that stuff will be coming out soon. Today we're going to do Rorke's Drift by Sabaton History. Let's get into it.
Rorke's Drift was a decisive battle between the smaller but better armed British and the Zulus. Now, this showcased the overpowering technological might of the colonial invaders.
And our song Rorke's Drift is about that battle.
January
I really liked the song. I thought it was great.
22nd, 1878, in the age of colonization and conquest. By now, the British ultimatum to the Zulu nation to both withdraw and disband their troops had expired. Overconfident of victory, the British 24th Regiment went out to face the Zulu in battle at the foot of a little mountain called Isandlwana. The British, though, had left their wounded and sick behind at a small mission near the Buffalo River. There, on the western slopes of a hill the Zulu called Shiane, the men spent their days drilling and parading under the command of the officers Bromhead and Reynolds. The two thatched buildings and the compound were known as Rorke's Drift. James Rorke had been the son of an Irish soldier who had fought in one of the many border wars against the local African tribes. James, on the other hand, had made a living by trading, hunting, occasional gun running with the natives until his suicide. His estate changed hands until it came to a Swedish missionary, who in turn leased the compound to the British colonial forces to use as a hospital and a storage space. As afternoon drew near, the wind carried the sounds of distant gunfire through the valleys to Rorke's Drift. It was the distinct sound of the two 7-pounder guns that the British main body had carried with them. At first, this caused little concern. For just a year earlier, a small British force had triumphed over 6,000 Xhosa warriors, so this would surely go no differently, right? Well, as the cannon fire subsided, a lone rider came galloping towards them. The man was terrified and without his weapon, only repeating a single sentence over and over again. "The camp is taken by the Zulus. The camp is taken by the Zulus." More riders soon arrived, this time men of the native mounted contingent. None spoke English, but they had a note that read that the camp at Isandlwana was in danger of being overrun. Rorke's Drift was to be fortified at once.
News that came that morning told that the main force had been slain. Chance for peace and justice gone, and the talks had been in vain.
What a wild scene where you have troops with firearms fighting warriors with shields and spears. I know this has happened a whole handful of times historically, but it's just such a bizarre sight to see. A pretty modern gun in the hands of somebody when they're getting spears chucked at them. It's just the whole thing's kind of weird.
The prince had been abducted and he had gone the path of war. Now the 1,500 men had gathered the Zulus at the door.
The men began barricading the missionary compound. Everything useful was dragged out of the storehouse, all except for the kegs of rum and water. The reserve ammunition boxes were open.
Absolutely, you have to keep the rum there.
They had 20,000 cartridges, enough to make a stand. They stockpiled food, mostly hardtack and bully beef, and stacked the heavy, these are 200-pound mealie bags and biscuit boxes, it's like 100 kilos, into a defensive wall. Most of the compound was shielded by a waist-high stone fence, which they now reinforced. Both buildings were solid brick houses, though. with the larger storehouse about 30 meters from the hospital, which was small, divided into 11 rooms and crammed with men, now making shooting holes in the walls while all windows and doors were barricaded. The men knew that their enemy would be merciless and spare no one, not even the wounded. The last remaining biscuit boxes and mealie bags were used to create a barricade in front of the storehouse. This was a last keep in case of a breakthrough. As the evening drew close, the lookouts on the roof spotted the first Zulu warriors. There had not been enough time to clear the fields around the station, and there was plenty of cover for the enemy. The Zulus approaching Rorke's Drift were of the 5,000 men-strong Undi Corps. During the battle at Isandlwana, they had been part of the Horns of the Buffalo, the Zulu tactic to envelop their enemies. They had been tasked with widely outflanking the British, but ultimately came too late to take part in the battle. The defeat of the British had been achieved without them. They had been denied glory. Now, Zulu military organization was...
And not only that, but they had not fought like everybody else. So had they just fought a major battle, they're probably a little more exhausted than they are right now, having almost completely missed it.
Divided by age and rank. And there was a deep rivalry between the regiments. Only those mature veteran regiments that had won glory in battle were awarded the rights to marry and to bear the sacred white shields into battle. The Undi Corps consisted of men in their physical prime, around 30 years old, hungering for pride and social status. They very much wanted to prove themselves. Led by Prince Dabulamanzi Kampende, they made their way to Rorke's Drift. The Zulu warriors were not suicidal fanatics or anything, but cunning, courageous, and highly athletic light infantrymen, skilled in using their traditional weapons, clubs and spears. A few bore firearms, and although they were untrained in handling those effectively, even an unskilled rifleman could find his target.
Yeah, I talked about that during the song. They have a handful of guns on their side, and yes, they don't know how to really, like, they haven't trained with them, right? They haven't drilled with them, but it changes the math a little bit, right? If you're fighting somebody that only has spears and clubs versus you're fighting somebody that at least sporadically has a firearm in there, you know, you're a little more careful sticking your head out and things like that.
When they appeared on the scene, the native mounted contingent had turned and fled, which left 154 men as the defenders of Rorke's Drift, 20 of whom were ill. At around 4:30 p.m., the battle began. The first Zulu attacked in a frenzy. Worked up by their witch doctors and narcotic stimulus, they charged towards the south wall of the mission, 600 warriors against only 30 defenders. The British soldiers fired into the advancing men. Now, a trained British soldier was able to load and fire the Martini Henry rifle every 7 or 8 seconds. So people got off around 8 or 9 shots each in the time it took the Zulus to close in. Now, they sprinted from cover to cover, disregarding the men that fell. At 200 meters, the rifle fire caused massive damage as the Zulu shields offered no protection against the high-caliber bullets. And just before they reached the barricade, the British officers ordered a salvo at point-blank range. The devastating effect of this fusillade broke much of the attack's strength. Still, single men and small groups fought on, trying to scale the walls. Pumped up on adrenaline, they jabbed with their assegai spears against the defenders. But once they tried to climb the barricades, they were easy targets for the longer British bayonets. Once at the barricades, it was close-quarter combat. The British officers dashed from point to point, revolvers in hand, inspiring the men to stand firm, shooting into the massive attackers that pressed the defenses. Where they...
This is so crazy. It's like an ancient battlefield, but it's not, because you have firearms. But the type of combat and the way that the battle is playing out are like battles before this time period. And so it's a really weird mix here of kind of old and new, right? And so it just makes the whole thing really, really bizarre.
Could the men work together, one stabbing, the other reloading? The officers knew that the first battle they had to win was the psychological one. If the men faltered in fear, if they hesitated to kill or lost their heads in terror, all was lost. The Zulus could not be allowed to enter the compound. But the men did not hesitate. Desperation meant aggressiveness. They knew that they would either fight or they would die.
Zulus attack, fight back to back, show them no mercy and fire at will, kill or be killed, facing or waiting.
At 5 o'clock, the great mass of the Undi Corps threw itself against the mission. The British held. The Martini Henry rifle was superb in this kind of fighting. Even when held like a pike, the soldier could still pull the trigger, and the long bayonet had the range on the Zulus' short spears. Soon, a belt of corpses lay around the mission. Another obstacle the attackers had to step over. The chaplains and the wounded men passed ammunition and water to the defenders. It was evening, but still the sun was beating down, and the constant fighting was exhausting and dehydrating. It was adrenaline and camaraderie that kept the men sharp. Still, the Zulu came on. By 5:30, the defenders were nearly overwhelmed. The lines were just too thinly held, and they now ran the risk of losing everything. The growing exhaustion and the casualties had made them retreat to the inner line and establish a center of resistance around the storehouse, behind the walls of biscuit boxes and mealie bags. By 6 o'clock, the Zulu commander were getting frustrated. This was supposed to be an easy battle, but the casualties were high, and there had been no major breakthrough yet. They had been fighting for 90 minutes, but the British line still held firm, though the hospital had been cut off. Soon, it was surrounded, and the Zulu were throwing burning spears on the thatch roof. It caught fire, and the men inside had no choice but to flee. Everything played out in a few minutes. Men jumped out of the windows, some making a dash across the compound. Others tried to carry the wounded and sick with them, while others fought the Zulu, who were now breaking through the doors. They were cut down by the Zulu. It was now all down to the final perimeter. As the sun began to set, they made a massive attack to overwhelm the defenders. There were no tactical maneuvers here. They either broke them or they did not. Once again, they were beaten back. Darkness fell at 7 o'clock. British ammunition was running low, and rifles were running hot from constant use. Again, the Zulus tried to throw assegai wrapped in burning grass on the storehouse roof, but this time they were shot down in the attempt. Slowly but surely, the Zulu spirit was wavering. Throughout the night, the aggressive chanting was heard around the compound, but the major weakness of the Zulu, their lack of a supply system, was getting to them. They were hungry, they were thirsty, and they were exhausted.
Again, it's like an older battle. Like it's like an ancient warfare battle where you don't have the major supply lines behind you, and so you kind of fight until you can't fight anymore, until you run out of supplies or whatever, and then that's kind of it, right? That's why all these older battles are normally short, sharp clashes that last part of a day or a day, and then that's kind of it, right? It's the same sort of thing.
It was a sleepless night for the defenders, but as dawn broke, the Zulu were gone. The Zulu host may still appear, but they would no longer attack. After a while, the British ventured out onto the battlefield. They searched the remnants of the hospital for survivors, but it was a gruesome sight. The Zulu had hacked their comrades to pieces. The official report said that 350 Zulu were counted dead, but according to diaries, it was many hundreds more. At 8 a.m., a relief company finally appeared, and Rorke's Drift was saved. 11 Victoria Crosses, the most ever awarded to a regiment for a single action, would be awarded to the defenders for a victory against a force that had outnumbered them by far. Now, that might sound like just another heroic tale of a ragtag squad of outnumbered men spending their last bit of strength to defend themselves against an onslaught of madmen. Madmen who they had come to rescue from a life in hardship by bringing them into the modern age. And that's sure as hell how the British portrayed it and saw it. But let's think of this from the Zulu perspective for a moment. To them, it was a fight against an invading enemy.
Yeah, these were invaders. It's the same thought process with basically all of colonialism. It's an invasion. That's what it is, right? So history judges these things differently the further away you get. You start to look much more pragmatically at it. and the emotion goes away, right? I've talked about this in regards to Genghis or Genghis Khan, um, how the way he's talked about by historians now is much more what he brought in terms of trade and bringing about the kind of new world and all that. But the people at the time certainly did not see him that way, right? And so that's kind of the way all of history is. If you look at it through the lens of the time or through the lens of a particular people, it looks much more like, well, like an invasion.
An enemy that came with superior weapons, an enemy that came to impose on the Zulus strange customs, an enemy that wanted to change the structure of Zulu life and culture, an enemy that had already shown a willingness to steal and exploit, and an enemy that knew nothing of the Zulu ways, showed no pardon, and knew no mercy. There is merit, perhaps, to both ways of seeing it, but in the aftermath of the Battle of Rorke's Drift, what the Zulus would remember most was probably the improvised gallows used to hang hundreds of the captured Zulu fighters as punishment for daring to attack this invader with such primitive fury. Executions for daring to kill these British men who thought themselves superior, and indeed were superior, in the art of mechanized killing. So Rorke's Drift is an interesting song for you guys to choose because you have a lot of things about world wars, Swedish history, stuff like that, things that might be more obvious choices. And Rorke's Drift is, this is colonial Africa. Now, the reason I think it's interesting is because the colonization of Africa is a very sensitive subject to a lot of people,
Yeah, I've done the video on Belgium in the Congo. Man, yeah, colonialism, especially in Africa, got really, really rough.
I mean, there were a great deal of atrocities committed there. You think, especially things like what happened in the Belgian Congo. Now, Belgium, unlike like the British Crown, ruled the British colonies, but Belgian Congo, that was the personal property of King Leopold. It wasn't Belgium that had it. It was counted as his personal property.
Yep, and so everything that happened, at least for a lot of historians, is laid directly at the feet of Leopold. I mean, there were quite a few atrocities committed in the Congo on the behalf of really one man, right? Because it's not even like it's, as a group, Belgium's. It's literally his, and he's making the decisions on what to do. So yeah, for a lot of historians, what happened in the Congo is directly laid at the feet of Leopold.
And the first real genocide of the 20th century was stuff that happened in some of the German-occupied colonies in Germany, East Africa and stuff, which happened, 10 years before the Armenian genocide and stuff like that. So I found it really interesting that you would pick a sensitive topic like, well, you do, when you cover the Six-Day War and other things and stuff. But I don't know anyone else who's ever written a rock song, a pop song, a rock and roll song, a country song, anything about the British colonization of Africa.
But you gave me an idea. We should do a country song about it.
A country song about Rorke's Drift? It sounds like a country song.
Yeah, it is.
Yes,
Yeah,
it does.
because the Battle of Isand Luana doesn't sound like a country song.
No, that's more like hip hop.
Now, I'm curious what our fans from the southern parts of Africa, from any race or any region, think of this, because I know this is going to lead to a lot of comments and it's a lot of interesting discussion. I'm not saying this is something I don't look forward to. This is something I actually do look forward to see how people perceive the battles and the colonization of these parts of Africa it was called the Scramble for Africa in the 1880s and 1890s. Everybody wanted bits and stuff. The only person who didn't was Bismarck, Chancellor.
Yeah, scramble for Africa is the nice way to put it. But yeah, Bismarck had his eye on Europe. Like he was trying to his what he was looking at was very different than what everybody else around him was looking at. Like he had very particular things he wanted. He had very particular ways he wanted to do it. Like it was Bismarck's kind of an odd cat, but he's one of my favorite diplomats historically, European or otherwise. He's just such an interesting figure.
Bismarck, okay, he thought it would be a useless drain on German resources and they should be focusing elsewhere. Now, of course, this all came to play heavily in the First World War, like when Germany went through Belgium to attack France, and Britain joined the war, and the reason they gave to the public was, well, we guaranteed Belgian neutrality, and as Foreign Secretary Edward Grey actually said, okay, well, that wasn't the reason, that was a reason, but there were other reasons. What if Britain had not, for example, joined the war? They didn't have to. I mean, they weren't under attack. There are other reasons why they did. I mean, because somebody was going to win and tip the balance in mainland Europe. So either.
That is exactly right. I've talked about this in other videos. Britain has no reason to get involved in World War I. In fact, it would behoove them to stay out of it if they have nothing to lose by Germany winning, right? If they have nothing to lose by Germany winning, then it would behoove them to just totally stay out of it. However, they absolutely have their eyes on the scale of power in Europe. And they want Germany in a position to be usable as a power, but absolutely not the type of power that could rival Britain, which is what they had very quickly become. And so, I can't remember what the German diplomat called it, going to war over a piece of paper in regards to the guaranteed neutrality. But yeah, Britain certainly had other reasons for getting involved other than Belgium. And I believe if everything else is equal and it's just the neutrality of Belgium, the British don't get involved. I think they stay out of the war completely. At least, actually, no, I do believe that. If they're not worried about the power shift in Europe, I think they don't get involved.
Either way, you're going to have to be on one side or the other. But think of colonial Africa. I know. Think of colonial Africa. Britain does not join the war, right? So the Germans just take the Belgian Congo, and suddenly they have half of Africa and east to west Africa and could do whatever they like, and they've cut the British off.
Do you realize I've learned more about the colonization of Africa in those 2 minutes, or by the way, unscripted talking,
hey,
than I did in 9 years of basic school.
Well, it's fun being a historian. You learn to put things into the little perspective. But it's interesting to think that, I mean, if Britain wanted to preserve its hegemony in Africa, that's a reason they had to join the war as well. And it's a reason that nobody ever talks about either, because it's so lost between the other regions, like either France or Germany was going to win in Western Europe. One way or another, that's going to tip the side. If it's Germany, Germany has the second biggest navy in the world behind Britain. Do you really want those guys to have ports on the English Channel? No. So there's another reason to join France instead of joining Germany. So there are a bunch of reasons why.
Yeah, I don't think the worry is France. I think the worry is Germany. The worry is Germany. This huge power has immediately appeared. They roll the dice so incredibly lucky to get Bismarck, and he's just a masterful chess player on the European stage. And so Germany becomes extremely dangerous very quickly. They become a threat to Britain. And if they win the First World War, Britain is in a very precarious situation. And so, yeah, they had to get involved to stop this shooting star that was the growing power of Germany from just totally dominating the rest of the European powers in Africa, in Europe, everywhere.
Britain really had to join the war, although the best way to tell your people that you're joining the war is not to say, well, we don't want the Germans to take the Belgian Congo, because nobody cares about that at home in Britain. And you want to say, well, we guarantee poor little Belgium. In 1830, we said we guarantee your neutrality, so we have to join the war, and that you can sell the war to the public.
Yeah, that's how politicians do it. Usually,
There's always the reason that you sell it to the public, which is a simple emotional reason, and there's always the real reasons, which include the simple emotional reason, but they have other reasons that'll be reasons of economics, finance, and national security. That's why people join wars, unless they're idiots. I mean, people sometimes do that.
it's happened once or twice.
So yeah, well, that's Rorke's Drift.
That's a very different interview.
I know. I'm really glad we had this talk.
And that is all for today.
Okay. See you next time on Sabaton History.
Okay, so that was Rorke's Drift, the Sabaton history over the Anglo-Zulu War. That was a good one. Like I said, got a bunch of different stuff I'm working on getting out, so they should be out soon. Be on the lookout for them. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here. I'll put the link to the Discord down below. By the way, I had been putting the Discord link in the comments and pinning the comments. However, there were a few different ones where I wanted to pin a different comment and couldn't because I had the Discord pinned on there. So the Discord link is now going to be in the description box below. That's where it'll be. If you need it, it's there. So it won't be the pinned comment at the top anymore. Just go to the little box, the description box right above, and that's where it is. But I'll see you all next time.